Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the Perfect Pup Podcast. I am super excited for today's episode. We're going to be interviewing Traci Madson, who is a positive reinforcement certified dog trainer, and kind of going over her story and the really kind of amazing experiences that she's had going from more old school style training and getting involved with some of the Michael Vick rescue dogs and now having her own running training classes and running her own company and kind of going over that her kind of history. So we're super excited to have you on here, Tracy. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited. I love talking about my dogs. It's my favorite thing to talk about.
I know, right? Who does? There's nothing better than talking about your dogs, right? Like,
Yeah,
I'll have to make sure this episode doesn't go, 3 hours long, just because we
right.
could do that if we wanted to.
Yeah, you'll have to cut me off.
No. Yeah, like I said, I'm super excited. Just a little brief history. So, my name's Devin. I work at Pupford, and we started working with Tracy a few months ago, and worked on some courses with her that you've maybe seen. And she's in our private Facebook community, and they're answering questions from time to time. She's done a Facebook Live or two, and when I first kind of heard Tracy's story, I really just thought this is the story people need to hear, because it really is kind of quite the journey that you've been through. So let's just dive right into it. What made you originally get into dog training? Like, how did you first get started with training dogs?
So I moved to rural Utah, and I had an interest in doing search and rescue. So specifically, I wanted to work a search and rescue dog. So I joined our search and rescue. I think I was like the second female to join. And up here, it's like the good old boy type of thing. So it was really hard.
Yeah.
And I was able to get, well, I started training like one of my dogs that I had who was a pointer. So he had a really good nose, but he did not have the drive. And one of our trainers at the time said that he could get a dog for me from Canada that had failed cop school because he had the drive but he wouldn't bite. So dogs that don't hold a bite but have drive make really good search and rescue dogs, because we actually don't want them to bite.
Right.
So I was able to obtain that dog from Canada, and we formed a search and rescue dog team up where I live. And so I started training with other search and rescue trainers, and we trained a lot with law enforcement because the training is the same. It's just that the reward is different. So their dogs, the reward, our dogs will like search and search and search for a Kong, and their dogs search for the bite or or to play with a toy that smells like the drugs.
Hmm.
So and that's, other than doing basic obedience with my dogs growing up, this was my first experience with training dogs. So we learned traditional training. We used choke collars. We called them. We used shock collars, electric collars. We did things called alpha rolls, where you take a dog by the scruff and flip them on their back until they submit. And that's how I learned. So I just thought that's just what you do. So I have a really, really good friend now that says, now looking back, I feel bad that I, subjected my dog to this.
Right.
And she says, people do the best with what they know. And I've used that so much now with my clients, is you do the best with the knowledge you have.
Right.
But that's basically how I got into it.
That's super interesting. So I find that really interesting too, that the search and rescue and the cop dog training is super similar. I never knew that. So like when it was being taught to you, like, did you have any in the moment, did you have any thoughts of like, oh, this seems kind of mean? Or like, was it more of just like, these guys are the experts, I'm going to just listen to what they say and it seems to work kind of thing? Like what was that like?
Yeah, it was hard for me. In fact, I really resisted putting a shock collar on my dog, they had to put it on my arm. They put it on my arm, and they said, this is all your dog is feeling. It's like putting a battery on your tongue.
Mm.
And the way they kind of justified it is, these are really tough dogs. I mean, we're working German Shepherds and Dutch Shepherds and things like that. And so it's like, these are very high prey drive dogs, and you kind of have to use these kind of methods to get these dogs to work. Mm. And so when they put it on my arm, and I'm like, okay, it doesn't hurt. It is just kind of like putting a battery when you touch your tongue to a battery.
Yeah.
So it wasn't really, what I wanted to do, but I could see like, okay, if I want my dog to listen, I'm going to have to do this. So you kind of justify it in your mind.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I get what you mean. Yeah, because like the justification, because I mean, when we first got our puppies, we went to like a group class, and they were like, okay, you have to use, what did they call it? Like a slip collar, or like a choke chain. Essentially, they had a prettier word for it. And I remember my wife and I kind of feeling weird about it, but thinking, well, they're the professionals, like their dogs seem well behaved, so I'll go with it. So kind of like with that, I mean, I don't know, it's kind of a tough question, but like, do you feel like you still had a good relationship with your dog? Like, was your dog obedient? Did your dog listen well? Or like, I don't know what, and how did your dog perform as a search and rescue dog? What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, he was so obedient, and it was explained to me after that sometimes these methods do work. It depends on the dog. And so that's what makes it hard for some people to understand, is that they're like, well, but look how obedient this dog is. And it depends on the dog, because sometimes it does work. And this dog would turn on a dime. If I said leave it or come, he would turn on a dime. And so he was very, very obedient. And I probably had, one of the best relationships that I've ever had with a dog, which is kind of what led me into that next phase of my life, because that dog in fact, when I went through my divorce, I'm like, you can take anything you want except the dog. That's the only thing I want is the dog. Mm-hmm. And when I had to retire him and he got older, my parents were actually worried about how I was going to handle it when he passed away. So they're the ones that said, we're thinking you should maybe get another dog. Mm-hmm. So you have a dog when Dakota dies. Because he went to work with me, he went everywhere with me. I had such a good relationship with him. Mm-hmm. So that's what's really hard about it, is that sometimes those methods do work, but more often than not, I've seen them not work.
Well, and I think one of the important things there is your situation is so different compared to what most people are, the people who are going to these, a group class one time, and they get taught by someone who maybe isn't that skilled with these aversive methods. Because like you said, I think, in some unique circumstances and with certain dogs, like it can work. But the thing that and you probably agree with this, is like, you have to have that consistency and level of expertise from the people who are teaching you how to do it. And that's often where I think, your everyday dog parent who gets a dog and they go learn for a couple hours about a choke chain or an e-collar, and then they go home and just kind of fumble through it on their own, they create much more problems down the road, just because they don't have that expertise, or someone who's there coaching them consistently.
Right. And now I get a lot of people calling me that have gone to an aversive trainer like that with a dog that is very shy and shut down. Mm. And those are the last kind of dogs that you ever want to put a shock collar on, because it's just going to make it worse.
For sure.
Yeah. So, that it does more harm and more damage to them than anything.
Interesting. Well, that's a good kind of segue on, like, it's a sad segue into kind of what I wanted to ask you about next. So, like I mentioned in kind of the intro, you were involved. You actually got one of the dogs from the Michael Vick raid. For those who aren't familiar, brief overview: Michael Vick was an NFL player who was running an underground and illegal dog fighting basically company essentially and did jail time. And maybe you can, explain that a little bit more too. But that's kind of what I want to focus on right now is like, how did you originally hear about the whole, because obviously when they did the raid on his compound, there was a lot of dogs there and, they needed homes. How did you originally hear about the whole Michael Vick situation? How did you originally get involved?
So I don't follow sports, and I didn't know who Michael Vick was.
Yeah.
And so when my parents said, you should probably start looking at getting another dog, I got on the internet and I somehow managed to get on Best Friend's website, and up popped this picture of this little red pit bull. Mm. And I had always been very skeptical about pit bulls because I believed everything I heard on the news.
Right.
In fact, when I was dating my husband at the time, his dad had a pit bull, and I remember, having to go meet parents, and I'm like, do not leave me alone with this dog because, they're unpredictable and everything. And he's like, oh, my dad's dog is so gentle, and I just believed everything that I'd heard. And then my next door neighbors came home with a pit bull, and I ended up falling in love with that dog. So every other day I'm like, if you don't want your dog, I'll take him. And it just changed my whole perception, and I just fell in love with that breed. I honestly thought I would have German Shepherds for the rest of my life. But so when this little red pit bull popped up, I'm like, oh my gosh, I want that dog. And so I started reading about the whole Michael Vick thing, and it just broke my heart. And I thought, I'm single, I don't have kids. I could really give a good home to one of these dogs. I've got experience with training. I mean, at that point, I'd been training dogs for like 8 years. And honestly, I took a lot of flack for wanting to adopt a dog like that. My parents tried to talk me out of it. And I, of course, I stopped listening to my parents a long time ago. And so then the next thing I know, I'm getting a call from my brother, and my brother's, saying like, okay, so mom and dad called and wanted me to call you. Like, what are you thinking? Are you sure you're not really capable of handling a dog like this? And I just felt it was something that I really wanted to do. And I had a good friend that actually gave me a good chewing out. She's like, you have no business adopting a dog like this. You don't know what you're doing, what you're getting into. And I didn't listen to any of them. So I called Best Friends and I said, are these dogs adoptable? What do I need to do? It was like adopting a child. I had to go through an application process, a background check, a credit check. They come and inspect your home. I had to get letters of reference. And then I called them like every 2 weeks to make sure that they didn't forget about me. And so they finally said, if it's just a pit bull you want, we have one that's here that has kennel stress, really needs a good home. Do you want to come and meet him? So I said, sure. So I drove down the 6 hours with my German Shepherd, and we met this tan brindle pit bull. We did a sleepover, and, I fell in love with him. And I said, yeah, I'll take him. But if I adopt him, can I still have one of the Michael Vick dogs? And they said yes. But at that time, none of them were ready for adoption yet. So I adopted Tacoma, and about 2 months later, my shepherd passed away. He was like 12 at that time. He had cancer, so he passed away. And then in January, the first Michael Vick dog was ready for adoption. And I honestly think that they gave her to me just to get rid of me because I was like hounding them all the time.
You're being persistent, right?
Yeah. So I went down with Tacoma, and we met Hallie, and Hallie was very, very shy with people, like very shut down and shy with people, but she immediately bonded with Tacoma. So, so I adopted, and kind of in between that, I really had my heart set on Little Red, who was the first picture that I saw that
Mm,
got me on this whole journey.
yeah.
And but then after I adopted Tacoma, I said, you guys know Tacoma and you know all the Vicktory dogs. They didn't like calling them Vick dogs, so they changed
Mm,
the name to Vicktory dogs.
I like that.
Yeah. So I said, you know all the dogs, so I'm going to let you guys pick the dog that you think is going to be best suited for our situation. So they picked Hallie, and I went down and met her, and she was very shy with me, like didn't really want anything to do with me, but she was there with her trainer and the adoption manager, and Tacoma was running around, and she jumped off the box that she was on and started playing with Tacoma
Mm,
immediately. So I adopted her, and um, one of there was a court order with all these dogs that we had to work with a positive reinforcement trainer. And
mm.
I said, great. I have no idea what that means, but I've been training dogs for 8 years. So if you tell me what to do, I can probably do it.
Yeah.
And they said, well, it's a little different. It's specialized. We'll help you find a trainer.
Mm,
So they found a gal by the name of Sky Poitras in Salt Lake, and she started working with me, and we became really good friends. In fact, it's because of her work with me and Hallie that I decided to, go into training myself.
mm,
But the cool thing with this is that, number one, if I would have done the things that I had learned with the search and rescue training on Hallie, it never would have worked. I mean,
mm,
she was so shut down anyway. She didn't trust people. She was terrified of people. Um, so any aversive training would have just shut her down more.
right.
So the science-based training and doing the desensitization, counter conditioning, all that stuff that I didn't know is what we had to use with her to get her. I mean, you think about a dog that's been basically tied to a wheel axle out in the middle of the woods for most of her life. We had to get her used to, you know, she was every time I turned the ceiling fan on, she'd run out of the room. If I got my guitar out, she was terrified. You
Hmm.
know, everything was new to her, so we had to get her used to everything basically in my house.
So I have a real quick question on, so like, do you know, I don't know how much detail they gave you or not, but do you know what like her exact situation was at the compound, or like how she was being, and I know like that stuff is infuriating, and it honestly just makes me sad just to even think about it and talk about it. But like, do you know what exactly she was being used for, or what her experience was like when she was at the compound?
Yeah, so she was one of their breeding dogs.
Okay.
So she was basically, I mean, I know her intake picture, she was like 25 pounds, so she was emaciated.
Jeez.
She did have scars all up and down her front legs, but she didn't have scars on her face and her ears, so we know she wasn't a bait dog. Plus, the bait dogs, they usually file down their teeth.
Mhm.
But she was basically strapped to a rape stand,
Mm.
and she was used for breeding.
Jeez.
But she was really good with other dogs, and so at Best Friends, they actually used her to help some of the other shyer dogs come out of their shell and socialize. But we found that most of the dogs got got along with other dogs.
Hmm.
Some of the grand champion fighters didn't; they had to be an only dog. But a lot of the dogs ended up going to homes with other dogs and did fine.
Interesting. Hmm.
So
So yeah, when and one other thing that I was curious on with, I find that so interesting that there was a court order that you had to do positive reinforcement. Like how? So I mean, do you think that was that best friends who was like pushing that through to make sure, because they understood the history and what had happened to those dogs, and they needed to make sure. Like, do you know how that came to be that there was an actual court order that said you have to use positive reinforcement?
yeah, that's a good question because I know there were several agencies involved with the rescue. There was Best Friends and Bad Rap were the two biggest ones.
Hmm.
Um, And I know they didn't want any of the dogs to end up in the wrong hands because for several years, I wasn't even allowed to let anybody know where Hallie lived
Oh,
because
interesting.
the street value of these dogs was so high that, there were cases when Sky and I would do like public appearances, fundraisers. We were on the news, and I couldn't say where I lived.
Hmm.
I would just, mention county or,
The
general
state or
area.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we couldn't say where we lived. So yeah, it was probably best friends
Hmm.
that
Interesting.
did that, but
Yeah.
I'm not positive.
Yeah, that's super interesting though that yeah, it makes you I mean, it's good that they understood, right? Like that it needed to go into the right home. So and
Yeah.
so my next question, you kind of already touched on this. But you said she was very, very shy around humans, things like a fan or even a guitar, like because like you said, she's never seen any of these things her entire life. She's an adult age-ish now, right? And so it's like, what was that process like of like basically rehabbing her and helping teach her to be a dog? And how long did that take? What was that experience like?
Well, it took several years, and I think this is one of the things that taught me patience. And I think this is because I'm not a patient person. Um, I think this is one of the reasons that I really wanted to get into rescue. And my favorite dogs to work with are like the feral dogs, the really shy and shut down dogs that we get like from the reservations,
Hmm.
because the smallest little things they do are the biggest victories. I mean, I remember it probably took 3 months for me to be able to walk Hallie around the block without her pancaking.
Mm. Wow.
And I remember the first time we walked around the loop without her pancaking, like she'd pancake when a car would go by.
Like just lay down
And
and stop moving.
oh yeah, she would be terrified.
Hmm.
And I like, text Sky, and I called the people down at, because I kept in touch with the people down at Best Friends, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you guys, we actually just went all the way around the loop, and it was like 3 months.
Yeah.
But Sky worked with us for at least 2 months, and we couldn't get Hallie to do anything. Like, she was so shut down and so shy. So we just started working with Tacoma. And Tacoma had such a really good temperament that I actually wanted to train him to be a therapy dog,
Mm.
because by now, my whole perception of pit bulls had changed. And so I wanted other people to see that, yeah, they're not the dogs that you hear about on the news.
Right.
So I asked Guy if she could help me get him certified as a therapy dog. So we started training Tacoma to do things. And um, all of a sudden, one day, Hallie saw us doing some easy like hand targeting things with Tacoma, and all of a sudden she just walks up to Sky and does a hand target.
Hmm.
And
Wow.
that one little thing, we were like, oh my gosh, did you see what she just did? I mean, it was so easy, but for her, it was so huge.
Yeah.
And I at the time I worked for a fire department, and I would, and all the guys would get down on her level, and her tail was tucked, and so anytime she would even just give a slight tail wag or take a treat out of their hand was like huge for her.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was just very slow. And I still remember the two main training sessions that I remember with Sky. It's like Sky would touch my ceiling fan, I'd give a treat. She would touch it, I'd give a treat. And then she would barely make it move, I'd give her a treat.
Mm.
And then we'd bring my guitar out and just have Hallie look at it, treat.
Mm.
And then she would just like pluck one string, treat. And we would just go through this really slow process of getting her used to all of this. So it probably took months before I could actually bring it out and play
Mm.
without her being afraid of it.
Yeah, that's such an interesting like it really does make you think and get perspective of like, especially when people are adopting dogs that are rescues and you don't know their history, you don't know the background, like it just takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of work, and it takes, like you said, the more science-backed techniques of the counter conditioning and the desensitization. And I think it's just such a good reminder for everyone who's training, whether even if you just have a brand new puppy, right? That it's like
Yeah,
I think in your mind you want things to happen overnight, or you have this mindset of like, oh, I need to get my dog to this point by this certain day, or by this age. And it's just not how dogs work, right? Like every dog is different, every situation is different. There's always different things that you have to do for each dog. um,
right.
and so my kind of my question off of that too is like, so you did many years of kind of the more old school methods, and then you got into training Hallie, and you were using the positive reinforcement. Like, what makes you, when you get other dogs, or you teach now, right? You're a trainer now, you have classes, and you have your own clients. Like, why do you choose to teach positive reinforcement?
Mainly because I've seen, one of the things I learned from Sky, and I've got other mentors too that I've like taken classes from and studied under, is that I I've seen how the science-based training, you can really increase and develop a bond with your dog.
Mhm.
And I because I work full time at a rescue, I see a lot of dogs that are just so, their start in life has not been good, including some of the ones that I've adopted. Um, and you really have to develop that bond and that trust with them. And if you do, old school type of training, that's just not going to happen. And
Right.
so I'm just really passionate about, building that trust, and it's based on science. So we know it works. And I've had a lot of clients come to me with dogs that it's like, oh, I did boot camp, and they put a shock collar on my dog, and now my dog's aggressive. And it's because dogs learn by association. And if timing's not right, and if it's not done properly, yeah, it can really mess up. And it's like, why would you want to use fear, intimidation, or pain to train a dog when you can use positive, better methods and increase that bond? you
Mhm.
know
And still get
you
the
can
same
use
end
this and
result.
still get the same results. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, because I mean, I've been around two of your dogs, and they're both super well behaved, and the nicest dogs. And I think you told me both of the ones that I've been around had a tough background and a tough history. And I think, like you said, it's just that's how kind of how I feel about it too. Is like, if you could, like, why do the one that involves fear? Like, just choose the one that is going to make your dog happier and feel more comfortable. And because I think when we take a step back and think about like ourselves, right? Like how we were taught in school, maybe you had a teacher who was very authoritarian, and like anytime you talked out of turn, they were yelling at you or making you feel bad. But then you have you know the other teachers in school or whatever who were nice. They would answer your questions, they would guide you through, and help you feel like you were improving. Like, and for me, I look back on those two different types of teachers, and I in my mind I felt like I just was learning better with the one who encouraged me and helped me feel like I was on the right path, and like versus the teachers who were yelling at you or making you feel bad. And
Right,
that's us
exactly.
humans, but dogs are so much similar in that sense.
Yeah.
So now,
Yep.
that after training Hallie, and that process of multiple years of getting her to be more comfortable, and being able to be around people and around different situations. Real quick, where did you kind of go after that? Because I know you said working with Sky that made you want to start doing training on your own. What kind of happened after your experience with Hallie?
Well, from the time that I kind of adopted um, Tacoma and Hallie, and then I actually adopted a third dog from Best Friends. Jasmine was she was rescued from another dog fighting bus called the Ohio 200.
Mhm.
She was a little pocket pity, and just that kind of got me in the rescue bug. So it's just like, this is what I want to do. At the time, I had a really good job with good benefits, but I wasn't really happy doing it.
Mm.
And I knew I wanted to be working with dogs. I wanted to be training. I wanted to really get involved in rescue. Um, in fact, Sky and I and a couple other people, we started a pit bull rescue
Mm.
where we didn't we didn't really have the means to actually take in dogs, but we raised money for low and no cost spay and neuter. We did training for people that couldn't afford it. We did education on the breed. So we did, you know, fundraisers and stuff like that. Um, and I just always knew that I wanted to be involved in rescue and helping these dogs. And you know, and then one day I said, so Sky, now that I've been working with you for like 3 years, do you think I could actually do this? And she said, yes. And I said, would you like mentor me and help me? And she said, absolutely. So
Mm.
she's been like, this whole process, like adopting Hallie in Tacoma totally changed the course of my life.
Mm. That's awesome. Yeah, and I mean, I can say just from my interactions with you, I know how much you love and care about dogs, and I think it's so important. There's so many, there are unfortunately so many dogs out there who need the help and need, the support systems around them, and have come from tough situations. So, one another question I have, and we maybe just have time for a couple more, but what would be your biggest piece of advice to people who bring home a rescue dog or a dog that's shy, or, where, the background's kind of unknown? Like, what, if you could give, one or two like main pieces of advice, what would it be for people with rescue dogs or who are looking to rescue?
You know, my main advice for people is, you know, it seems like everybody wants the perfect dog, but really where we don't know the background, and behavior is the science of one. So every dog is an individual. So you can't compare dogs. You know, you can't say, oh, my last dog was perfect and did this and this and this.
Mm.
And you know, my neighbor's dog is perfect. How come my dog isn't like this? And some dogs really do have a rough start in life, and you have to celebrate like every little advancement with them. It's just like when Hallie, it took her 2 months just to go touch Sky's hand, and it took probably more than that for her to walk around the block with me. And those were like huge milestones for her. We celebrated those, like, oh my gosh, did you see what she just did?
Mm.
And it was awesome. So just like celebrate those little tiny things and don't expect too much from them. And just, it's more like just celebrate the journey that you take with your dog, and don't expect them to be, you know, the perfect dog in a month or two, because, you know, it's probably not going to happen. But you'll have a lot more fun, and you'll develop such a good bond with your dog if you just enjoy the whole journey with them.
I love that. I think that's great advice, and I think that applies even for people who, if even if you're starting at a brand new puppy, just enjoying the
Yeah,
experience. And because, like, I'm sure you can relate to this. Like, even with my two puppies that I raised, like, I look back and I was like, man, it was frustrating and it was hard, and cleaning up pee, and all the, they chewed up one of our tables, like all the difficult things. But then, like, you keep moving forward, you keep progressing, and like you said, that bond that you can create with your dog is just so powerful. It's like nothing else out there. It
yeah.
really is. If you put the time in, you stay patient, it's so great. So maybe my last question here is, um, you probably took a path that most people aren't going to take in regards to getting involved with rescues. You were involved with it, whether it's good or bad, with some of the most like famous dogs in a sense, right? Just because they came from the whole Michael Vick situation, and that was so publicly well known. Like, most people aren't going to go that route, right? But what would be your biggest piece of advice, or, for people who want to get more involved with rescues, whether it's actually rescuing dogs or volunteering? Because I know you work, you have your dog training and your clients, but then you also work at um, a rescue organization. So yeah, what would be your advice for people who want to get more involved on the rescue side of things?
Well, there's so many dogs and cats that need help. I mean, locally, even if you're, I mean, I'm allergic, so
To
I, you know,
cats?
and especially, especially right now with coronavirus. Every time I sneeze or cough, people are like, "Oh my gosh!" I'm like, "It's okay. I just have allergies."
Yeah, yeah,
I just brought a cat home, so I just take Zyrtec every day.
yeah.
But there's so many people that love to just come and walk dogs,
Mm,
and we have some really great volunteers that come and like just socialize with cats every day, or they come walk our dogs. We have some that have allergies, so they make dog toys for us. And it is like some of the most rewarding things because there's something about rescue dogs that they just know that you're there to help them,
mm.
and they love you for it, and it's just the most amazing feeling. I can honestly say that even when I have a day off, I'm like, oh geez, I really wish I was at work today because I look forward to going to work every day, and I love being home with my dogs, but I also miss, right now most of our dogs are in foster, and I miss our dogs. We do have dogs
Yeah.
there still, but it's really rewarding to see, the dogs that we work with in our behavior program, to see the changes and the advancements. But people that want to get involved in rescue, there's always something you can do. We have amazing volunteers that make enrichment toys for us. They'll come in, fill paper cups with peanut butter and freeze them. So like there whatever level you want to be involved in, you can be involved.
Mm.
And there is a role for everybody.
I love that. That's awesome. And I, like you said, I think it's very, very rewarding, whenever whether it's helping other people, but I think for some reason helping dogs too, it's even more rewarding just because, they're such good creatures, for lack of a better word, right? Like they're always happy to see people, and they're just so grateful. But I really do enjoy. I enjoyed hearing your story. I'd already heard it kind of briefly, but I loved hearing it again. I love that, there's, like you said, there's so much opportunity for us to, number one, I think always be continually learning when it comes to our dogs and dog training. You were 8 years of doing more of the old school styles, and then, making that transition and sticking with it. Like, I think that's just such like an important note for everybody, myself, everybody who's listening to this episode. It's like, we can always continue learning more and improving how we communicate with our dogs, and just becoming better at teaching them how to, be good citizens in the world where they interact with humans. So I really do appreciate
Yeah.
you coming on, Tracy. We'll have to do some more type of interviews like this with, maybe go in depth on other topics, but I really, really appreciated having you on and hearing your story. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This
Okay,
was
well,
fun.
awesome. Well, thank you everybody for listening, and we will catch you on the next episode. And also, I will put a link to your website, Tracy, just so people can learn more about you. Um, the full name is Three Little Pits. Tell me the
It's
full name.
Three Little Pits, positive dog training, but it's under threelittlepits.com.
Okay.
It's under construction right now, so.
Yeah, that's okay. I
But
think I think most people's websites are always under some type of construction, right? You're always
yeah,
trying to get more things
luckily
done,
my
but
my web person right now is home doing nothing, so she's working on my page.
that's awesome. Yeah, so I'll include a link to that in the show notes, and if you want to reach out to Tracy and just give her a thanks or whatever, I'll have her website in there. But thanks again so much, everybody, for coming and listening, and we will catch you on the next episode.